Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Solo Spooky Story. My name's Rob, and today I'll be your host. For those of you that don't know, the Solo Spooky Stories are stories where every other week I will present a case tale story on my own that I've found particularly interesting, or has been submitted by a listener, or Suze has found something for an episode, or I have that just doesn't have enough content in it, but we decide to do a one-on-one story instead. So today is no different, and today is actually a case that I'm super excited about. It's something that I have been really interested in for a while, and I've been thinking about should this be a main episode, should be a solo episode. There's a bit of back and forth and settled on it being a solo episode, with the, I suppose, caveat that we could potentially revisit it in the future because there's so much to this case and it's just really, really interesting. But before I get into that, I hope you're all keeping well whenever it is that you're listening to this, enjoying a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and you're ready for just a short little bite-sized piece of the paranormal on whenever it is that you're listening to this. So with that said, let's get into today's episode. So today we are talking about our super famous UFO case, one that I have been fascinated by for years, and it's just one of those stories that is just really captivating. I find it's one of those ones that every time you look into it, there's a bit more to it, and I think because it's so in our recent past that a lot of people are still alive that were experiencing it. There's a whole town there. There's just so many different kind of parts to this story, and with it being a UFO case, obviously I'm the one that was going to present this on the podcast. So today we're talking about the Todmorden UFO case or story or whatever you want to call it, and this is kind of the reason why there was a lot of back and forth with this one with me was there's an element of true crime to this at the very start, or not so much true crime, but it deals with a murder, which, as anyone who listens to us knows, that we don't really talk about on this podcast. It's not for us. So I had a bit of hesitancy talking about it up till now, and I'm just gonna kind of fly through, pun intended, this part of the story at the start, and then kind of get into the meat and bones of the main case itself. But just to acknowledge that, yeah, it's not something that we really kind of talk about much as people know, and we'll kind of maintain that. So there's a certain amount of respect that has to be maintained there with these people, and as I said, a lot of these people are still alive and such, so that's kind of another part to it. But yeah, so our story today takes place in 1980. So on the 6th of June 1980, a 56-year-old coal miner named Zygmunt Adamski left his home in Tingley, which is in West Yorkshire in England, to do some shopping. And unfortunately, that was the last time he was ever home. So he never returned from home, and 3 days later, on the 9th of June, his body was unfortunately found in mysterious circumstances. So to say mysterious circumstances is an understatement, really. His body was found on top of a 10-foot high pile of coal in the town of Todmorden, which is 20 miles away from his house, so a decent enough distance. And just everything about it just looked strange. There was just a lot of just uncertainties here, and police were immediately dispatched to investigate this, understandably. So a local police officer, whose name was Alan Godfrey, remember that name, he was just dispatched to investigate it, and he, when examining Adamski at the scene, discovered that he was wearing a suit. His shirt and wallet and watch, though, were all missing, and that immediately stuck out to him as something that was quite odd. I suppose initially he might have thought that it might have been a robbery or something like that, and he was dumped there. He wasn't sure, but kind of looking at him further, then he noticed that Adamski's hair had also been cut in what Godfrey, the police officer, described as being roughly cut in quite a strange manner. So it looked like someone had done this themselves. The other thing that he noticed then, that he only had what appeared to be 1 day's growth of facial hair, despite being missing for several days. So, he barely had a 5 o'clock shadow basically on his face, which wouldn't make sense for someone who'd been missing for 3 days at this point. So the young policeman, Godfrey, he kind of took notes on all this and examined the body before it was taken away, and he noted that there were a number of mysterious burns on his neck and around the kind of head and shoulder region as well. So all just very strange. These kind of things all just kind of stood out to him as not your usual run-of-the-mill, I suppose, case. So a coroner obviously was called in to perform a proper examination of the body and an autopsy. And when Adamski's body was removed from the scene, James Turnbull was the coroner, and he confirmed that some of the burns that were on the body were in fact there. But he went one step further to say that they had actually been treated with some sort of strange strange ointment. And that's a direct quote from him, this strange ointment that he couldn't identify, and allegedly forensic scientists also couldn't identify this. And Godfrey kind of went one step further to say that it looked like Adamski had been frightened to death. I don't know what that means, but I did see it as a quote kind of linked to this case, so I wanted to include it anyway, just to say, like, it's obviously a strange case, and with the coroner kind of going one step further to say that, it just kind of adds to the whole weirdness of it all. So naturally, there was a lot of mystery around this case, and there were some fairly kind of wild theories thrown about anything that could have happened. One theory that kind of did the rounds at the time was that Adamski had been killed by the KGB, and obviously this is right in the middle of the Cold War, so, you know, it I suppose not impossible. Another theory was that he'd been struck by ball lightning, which made him confused and caused him to wander off and die at the top of the coal heap, which is just mad. And then we wouldn't be talking about this today without it being the theory number 3 was that he had in fact been encountered by aliens and abducted. So the theory was that he was on his way to the shops. Aliens saw him and went, yeah, you're coming with us. Abducted him, did some experiments on him. He unfortunately died, and then they dumped his body there. So when asked about this final theory, Alan Godfrey, the police officer, said that, and a quote here is, "I'm open-minded, I can't rule it out," which is a pretty brave statement to make, I would say, at the time, considering the taboo that was around UFO cases and UFO stories and such at the time. Like, it's a pretty big move for someone to say that, especially a police officer, and he was quite young in his career as well, so it's an even, I suppose, bigger move to say that. But yeah, he said he couldn't rule it out, and that's kind of where the story of Adamski ends. And just as I said, I just wanted to fly through it and yeah, just kind of move on. But the reason why I've mentioned it is because it is tied to the bigger case that we're talking about today. And the case itself really focuses around the police officer, Alan Godfrey. So 5 months after Adamski had been found, so moving into November 1980, Todmorden once again found itself at the center of a lot of media attention. But this time it was Alan Godfrey himself who was at the center of all of this media attention. So he had been sent out one morning around 5 a.m. He'd gotten a call that there were a number of escaped cattle in a housing estate, which, you know, anyone who lives in this part of the world, it's something you're familiar enough with, and, you know, you do have to deal with it, unfortunately. So yeah, he was sent out 5 a.m. and was probably not too happy about getting a call about this, but it's his job, unfortunately, so he had to go deal with it. So he was out looking around this housing estate trying to find these cattle when, according to his own statement, he said that he was stopped dead in his tracks by what he claimed was an unidentified flying object. So he said that he was walking around looking and all of a sudden noticed this bright light in the sky. And as his eyes adjusted to it, and I suppose as it maybe got closer to him, he noticed that the object was this diamond-shaped vessel that was rotating on an axis. It was approximately 20 feet high and 14 feet wide. So this is a pretty large craft, I suppose, when you think about it. Like, it's over, 6 meters tall and 4 or 5 meters wide. Like, this is a big enough vessel when you think about the size of it. Like, and yeah, it was just rotating on its axis, this diamond-shaped vessel. So Godfrey went ahead and, like a good police officer that he was, pulled out his sketchbook, did a quick sketch of it in his notebook, and then hurried back to his car to grab his police radio. And he basically wanted to call in the incident. So as he got to his radio, he pulled it out and was getting ready to report it when he noticed that the radio was completely dead. He tried a few times to get it to work, nothing was happening. So clearly starting to panic now, he doesn't really know what to do, when he noticed that all of a sudden the craft in front of him just disappeared in this bright flash. Just 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. And as this flash happened, Godfrey all of a sudden found himself sitting now in his car, and he was 30 yards further down the road from where he'd previously been. So he hadn't been in his car, he was standing outside it, and he was a good bit away. So all of a sudden after this flash, he sees himself sitting in his car, he's 30 yards away, he does not know what's going on. He, in his state of confusion, glanced down at his watch, and he noted with some, a lot of surprise, I'd imagine, that 25 minutes had passed than what had just happened, basically. So he couldn't account for this 25 minutes. He had previously checked his watch at the time when he did his sketch, so he roughly knew what time it was, and 25 minutes later had passed. He does not know what happened during this 25 minutes. The other thing that he noticed was very strange sitting in his car was that one of his boots had been split open, and not only was the boot completely split open, but that he also had this mark on his foot and it was itching him quite a bit. So just, I suppose, put him in his shoes. You've seen this craft, you take out a sketch, you do it, you go to report it in, there's a bright flash of light, and then all of a sudden you've lost nearly half an hour. You're confused, you don't know what's going on, and then on top of that, then your boot is like split open and you've got this weird mark on your foot that you can't account for. So, and I would assume these boots at the time were like policeman's boots, like they're probably like leather boots, like thick leather boots. Probably not the easiest to cut into. So it just adds all the more to this kind of weirdness around this case. So Godfrey, he got out of the car and he walked back up the road to where he'd seen the light, trying to figure out, make sense of what had happened. And actually, when he got to the spot that he had previously been on, he noted that the road where his car had been sitting was completely dry, despite the fact that it had been recently raining. So this immediately stood out to him as very, very strange because, his car was gone now. So if he had moved his car himself, surely the ground should be wet completely from where it had previously been. So he just did not know what to make of this and decided to investigate the area a little bit more. And as he looked around, he actually ended up finding the cows that he'd been looking for this entire time. They were basically in a park next to the road. He maintains that these cows were not there before he saw the strange object, that he had actually just passed it, so there's no way they could have been there, and just couldn't figure out how they'd gotten there. So after some time, he finally managed to report this strange encounter and immediately was met with skepticism and a lot of ridicule. And I suppose people would have been aware of the fact that he had publicly said that he didn't rule out aliens only a few months ago with the Adamski case. So on the advice of his friend who was a solicitor, he decided to try to get out ahead of this and did what a lot of people at the time did, and he decided to go see a hypnotist to basically get back these lost memories that he think he had. So under hypnosis, he recalled that he'd been blinded by this light and that ultimately he'd passed out by it. But then after this, it kind of gets a bit weird. So he told the hypnotist that when he woke up from this light, that he was in a strange room and was being examined by several small creatures, and that behind these creatures was one tall humanoid figure. And he said it looked like this figure had a beard, which is just, I kind of almost love. There's just this bearded alien just getting these like small creatures to examine you, and it's just standing there looking at you. It's bizarre. Naturally enough, his claims were met with raised eyebrows, to say the least. So unfortunately, after a number of weeks, his account actually leaked to the newspapers, which is not surprising, and immediately became an international story. He was called into his inspector's office, and I think he basically thought he was going to get a bit of a bollocking from him for bringing a lot of attention that wasn't needed. But he claims that when he went into the inspector's office, there was a man in a dark suit and tie sitting there who introduced himself as the man from the ministry, which I'm a big fan. I love this. Basically, he's just met the Men in Black, effectively. So he claims that this guy had a file with him containing Godfrey's drawings of the strange craft, and that basically he was familiar with everything that Godfrey had said in this file. Godfrey asked could he see the rest of the file and was basically told, no, you're not allowed to see it at all. He just pretty much assumed, though, that it must have just contained his account of the evening's events due to the guy's knowledge of it. And allegedly, he claims that it also included his report on the death of Zygmunt Adamski a few months prior. So the man basically told Godfrey that he was here to make him swear on the Official Secrets Act that he'd not talk to anyone about what he'd seen. And Godfrey admits that he reluctantly agreed to it after being pressured by this mysterious man to do it. So Godfrey then goes on to say that he encountered this man on several occasions over the next few days, and that he believes that he was being followed by him effectively. So he says that after a few days, he decided he just had enough and confronted the man in a pub, telling him to basically fuck off. So the man allegedly disappeared and was never seen again, or Godfrey just never saw him again. So we don't actually know who this guy is. A lot of people have said that he could have been working for the Ministry of Defense. Another one says that he could have been an MI5 agent. No one actually knows. But Godfrey himself believes that he probably was, just from the Ministry of Defense or something like that. Another theory that I saw online was that the guy mightn't have actually been an agent at all, but that he actually was from the Yorkshire police, and that he was effectively being sent to frighten Godfrey into not speaking to the press, to basically remove attention from the force. And yeah, at the time, there was already a lot of press about the police at the time. There was a series of murders and such happening that had been unsolved, and it was causing, I think, a lot of PR issues. So yeah, that kind of ended Godfrey's initial interactions with the case. So after a period of time, it then came out that several other police officers at the time and and another bus driver had actually seen the strange lights on the same morning. And because Godfrey's claims were seen basically as a total embarrassment on his career, they never came forward to say anything. But I think he eventually found out later that they told him themselves that they had seen something. So with all of this going on, and due to Godfrey being quite early in his career, he was actually transferred to a different department effectively. I think he was transferred out to a different area, and I think they even tried to have him effectively like kind of removed from the police force. It didn't happen in the end, but that's how serious they were kind of taking this. So he then says that he was kind of followed by police. He says that he was hounded by them, that they basically didn't let up on their abuse on him, basically. I think they were effectively trying to force him to quit. And this all kind of culminated in him coming out and saying, I wish I'd never seen the UFO, particularly because of the effects on my children. It's not easy having a policeman as a father, but when he's a policeman who saw a UFO, it's even worse. So Godfrey acknowledges that this was like really negatively impacting his family, and he pretty much just didn't want anything left to do with it. So he kind of removed himself from this and didn't really talk to anyone else about it. So since then, there's been a few other bits and pieces that have happened in Todmorden that I'll briefly touch on today, but that kind of concludes the main part of the story. So a year later, in 1981, Todmorden resident Vicky Dinsdale was out walking her dog. She was with her grandfather when they saw this long, thin, diamond-shaped object that kept changing color. So Vicky's grandfather, who was a former sergeant in the army, told her to keep what they saw to themselves, and basically said, you'll be ridiculed, and basically treated the same way as Godfrey if you mention this to anyone. So that's just another story that I've seen online. Kind of, it's only a year later, very similar object shape. There's apparently been another few cases out there kind of talking about different sightings, and Todmorden itself seems to be a town that's kind of actually like leaned into it now. And I believe Godfrey has kind of made peace with what he's seen, and he's openly talking about it now again when people are asking him. He's not kind of going out of his way to do it, but I think if he's been invited to talks and things like that, he's going, but he's still stuck to the story like from the start, and he hasn't changed that. So yeah, that's kind of where it is. So the town itself, I think, kind of celebrates it now. There's like UFO groups and such there. It seems to be I don't want to say like cashing in on the story, but it's definitely, I think, leaning into the lore that's come out of around UFOs, and there has been, I think, a number of sightings with UFOs in the area since. So it's kind of almost become this hotspot in the UK that I would actually love to visit someday, because it actually just looks like a cool town anyway. But yeah, that kind of concludes it. There is a lot more to the story, and if people are interested, I can go into more detail with it, maybe in a main episode. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this really kind of captivating UFO story that's, you know, a lot of people are still alive that were experiencing this. Like Godfrey himself, he's still alive. He talks about it. He's still very much so kind of active in giving interviews and things like that when he's asked. So I you know, love to go to this area and see the sights and stuff for myself. Like, it'd be very, very interesting. But yeah, there's I suppose two real kind of sides to it. There's people that, you know, believe that the idea of alien abduction is basically total farce, that it must have just been a murder of Adamski initially, and he was dumped there, and then the sighting by Godfrey must be explainable as well, either, you know, through excessive drinking, I've seen some people saying, or, you know, hallucinations, or even an elaborate prank. Who are we to know? And then the other side kind of pointing to the history of UFO sightings in the area, the fact that Todmorden itself has since been kind of locally called the UFO Alley. A lot of people point to the UFO activity and abduction being the source of the explanation for both of these cases. But, you know, who are we to know? But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I really would. You can reach out to us on Instagram and Threads at the Spooky F Pod. Get us on YouTube as well, or you can email us at Gmail at the spookyfpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to know where you fall on this. Do you think it was actually an elaborate prank or hoax, murders, something else, or do you believe the UFO theory? Personally, I don't know where I fall in this. I think both sides are fairly believable. I'm probably leaning more towards the UFO one just because it's an interesting case, but you know, that's for you to let me know, and maybe we'll revisit this one in the future if there's enough interest. But with that said, I hope you're having a lovely day whenever you're listening to this, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy, guys.